All right, friends, welcome back to Talkin' Soccer. I am your host, Justin Hornker, and it's Champions League Matchday 5, which means that we know a lot about the scenarios going into the final day of the group stage, and there are some topsy-turvy results that happened today that really, surprised me in terms of like how the groups stack up and who's going through and who's not. Some spectacular crashes, some spectacular teams moving on to the knockouts. But, folks, let's get into it. If you're just stumbling upon this channel, make sure you give me a subscribe. If you like soccer vids, I'm going to have a Women's Champions League video coming out tomorrow. So if you want more info, if you like the men's game and you want to know more about the women's game, but you don't have time to commit to watching 25 soccer matches on a Tuesday, then yeah, give me a subscribe, thumbs up this video. But for now, let's dive into the first game of match day 5, which happened to be FC Porto versus Club Brugge. Now, a bit of a surprising matchup when you look at where exactly these teams are in the standing. So Group B going into the day, Club Brugge and FC Porto in the knockout spots, and Atletico Madrid and Bayer Leverkusen on the outs. So, going into match day 5, Atleti, Bayer need to win. They're playing each other, and Club Brugge and FC Porto playing each other as well. Let's see how this goes after the game. So, a bit of a lopsided matchup. And you look at how well Club Brugge have done in the Champions League. They hadn't let up a goal yet in the group stage, which makes it surprising when FC Porto upend them 4-0. But Porto did a lot of really interesting things in this game that I think contribute to this. If you look at the first goal, scored by Taremi after Otavio steps up into the channel, intercepts the ball, and just feeds it right through the two center backs. Slia tries to make a play on the ball, slips up, the ball goes right past him, and Taremi has a nice, easy curve on the ball to get it in. As easy of a goal as you're going to score in the Champions League. Porto would go on to do more of the same, ended up scoring goals from their big strikers. You had Taremi scoring that first goal, and then Evan Nilsson scoring the second goal. Stefan Estuquio, the Canadian star, scoring the third goal, having a nice little season with Porto, let's say. And then Taremi with the fourth goal, assisted by Otavio again. And when you look at what Porto were able to do to really kind of throw off Club Brugge in a way that hasn't been done through the group stages so far, you simply have to look at that first goal, and you have to look at the ratings of Slia and Buchanan. According to FotMob, Slia had a 3.9 rating. Tejan Buchanan a 4.7. Really shows you just how much Porto focused on that pairing, focused on play down the right side as well. And then, of course, on that center back pairing that could have had a much better day. That's not to say Porto isn't a good team. That's not to say Club Brugge isn't a good team, but they got the most out of this matchup in a day where you wouldn't necessarily have expected the Portuguese teams to do this well in the group stage. But when we look at going into match day 6, the scenarios, Portugal's looking pretty good. But that being said, that was the first Group A matchup. Let's look at Atletico Madrid and Bayer Leverkusen. So like I said earlier, Leverkusen need to come in to get the win. Atleti need to come in to get the win. And it ends 2-2 at full time. They share the points, and really a disastrous result, if you could say that there was a possible, worst result. They both pick up the points, but that ensures that neither of them are going through to the group stage. Atleti are going to end this with 5 points. Bayern are going to end with 4, and unless things go their way going into next week, they're looking at no European play at all after the group stage. And Atleti has no opportunity to move up into second. And now, depending on how Atleti play Porto and how Leverkusen play Bruges, that's going to decide who gets to drop down to the Europa League. But let's talk about this game a little bit before we go into the implications there. Of course, Atleti, Bayer Leverkusen both have spectacular players, but just haven't been able to turn it on for the Champions League. And I think that's Leverkusen have just been a mess, both in the Bundesliga and here in the group stage. So like maybe it's not completely unexpected. In the Bundesliga, they're sitting in 15th as of I'm recording this video. And this is a team that obviously made the Champions League last year and had expectations of challenging for the title before the season. To just be off to this slow of a start is pretty unacceptable from them. Running through the game, you had the first goal being scored by Diaby. It would, in the 9th minute, it would then be answered by Carrasco in the 22nd. Hudson-Odoi would put them ahead in the 29th minute, so we're 2-1 rolling into the half. Leverkusen feeling good. They're up, but Atleti would answer pretty soon into the second half with a goal from DePaul in the 50th minute, and then it's rough sailing from there on out. The game ends 2-2, your typical Atleti shenanigans, of course. Although Atleti's substitutions, that's something that Diego Simeone always tends to have a good grasp on. Subbing in Niguez and DePaul right at halftime, and DePaul gets that goal. So Atleti were better with their subs than Leverkusen were. They were able to make more of an impact. Atleti had more of the possession, which is something that, I don't know, it's not something you always see from Atleti, and it's interesting to see how they play with that. Atleti win the XG battle 2-5 to 1.5. So Atleti came into that second half just feeling frustrated. They had 23 shots in total to Leverkusen's 13. To end 2-2 with a club like Atleti, coming in, knowing where Leverkusen were in the Bundesliga, knowing how they've been playing in the Champions League, that's got to be one of the more frustrating results of the day. So that's Group B. We end up with Club Brugge with 10 points, leading the way going into Matchday 6. FC Porto with 9 points. And again, those two are guaranteed to go through, with Madrid with 5 points and Bayer Leverkusen with 4. So next up, we're talking Group A. And I want to start off with this Ajax and Liverpool game. It's a game that I had circled on my calendar as someone who co-hosts a podcast with a Liverpool fan. I'll plug the STL podcast up here for those of you that want to see another look at how I talk about soccer. But a game that Liverpool fans aren't feeling 100% confident. It isn't necessarily a team that has consistently put together the results that they would expect out of this team. They beat Man City. They outclassed Man City. Klopp outcoached Pep. And then they go on and they lose last weekend. So you look at a Liverpool team who, lost the opening Champions League game against Napoli, against an Ajax team who is also down bad at this point too, and you think, there could be a possibility for an upset here. Liverpool essentially already through. They would have just needed to pick up 1 point. But let's talk about this game a little bit more, because although it ended up being a pretty straightforward match, it didn't start out that way. Daley Blind, 2 minutes into this game, hits the far post off a just incredible curler. He gets the ball, he pushes it out. Just nice little interplay through Ajax, who built this one up through the left side. And we're able to, really expose Liverpool backline in that moment. But unfortunately, it hits the post. And, close only counts on horseshoes and hand grenades, as they say. The left side of Liverpool were attacked, especially early, but they definitely came back into this. If you look at the play of Alexander-Arnold and Robertson, they played well, especially after that first 2 minutes. That early kind of shock definitely wore off. And you could watch Liverpool just slowly, crunch down on this game. If you look at the XG, it ended up being in Liverpool's favor, 1.62 to 1.16. And that's including the high XG chance early on in the game for Ajax that they weren't able to convert. So after that, that's a pretty straightforward game. Mohamed Salah gets his goal in the 42nd minute. We love seeing Mo Salah goals on the channel. They're up 1-0 at the half. Darwin Nunez and then Harvey Elliott right after that, 49th minute, 52nd minute. So within 10 minutes of game time, it goes from 0-0 to 3-0. And then from there, Liverpool just have to see out the game. See out the game, they do. Ajax, wasn't necessarily that straightforward that Ajax still had chances. Ajax was still able to probe. But when you look at the overall kind of game score, and you look at the overall performances of this Liverpool team, there is not a bad performance on this day, as opposed to Ajax, where Daley Blind was for all of the almost goal in that first couple of minutes was definitely exposed. Sanchez was definitely exposed, and he's been getting it from Ajax fans lately as well. So that's a game that two teams kind of passing in the night, heading in opposite directions. Then you look at Napoli and Rangers. When we talked about this Champions League in the STL podcast, cheap plug at the beginning of this, we talked about how it'd be hard for Rangers to, even secure a point. And it's proven that difficult for them. They have Ajax next week, but they got completely run off the field by Napoli, who is in just a run of form right now. That's a game too that, even though both teams will be advanced, Liverpool and Napoli, by the time they play, seeding always important in the Champions League. But I think I'm just excited to see a Liverpool team that has been playing much better than they were at the start of the season, despite their loss last week, against a Napoli team who definitely outplayed them, outcoached them in the first Champions League game of the season. And seeing that kind of redemption tour from Klopp, that poster board material, it's going to be a really fascinating matchup. But let's not move past that too much. Let's talk about Napoli Rangers real quick. So Napoli end up winning 3-0, and it wasn't really close. Simeone scored in the 11th minute, in the 16th minute. It's 2-0 already, and they just kind of saw the game out from there. Leo Østegård scored in the 80th minute to make it 3-0. But if you look at the game score again, you can see Napoli had the better players throughout this game. Really exposed Rangers back line between King and Davies. They both did not have good games. King is taken out late. McGregor made some bad plays on the ball as well as the goalkeeper. And not a fun look from the Scottish sides, I gotta say. Rangers, I guess it's fascinating that they were able to make it to the group stage, right? No Scottish team. I know two Scottish teams have been in the group stage in a long, long time. So it was good seeing them get that level of exposure for a league that, had been down bad with Rangers being expelled. So progress on that front. In the group stage, though, man, it's been a rough go for them. They definitely have been, outclassed and outplayed. So that's where Group A is at the time. Let's go through. So Napoli out in front with 15 points. Perfect record, 20 goals scored, 4 goals against so far. Liverpool in second with their lone loss, being that Napoli lost at the beginning of the campaign. And then Ajax with 3 points in third. Rangers with 0 points in fourth. They have scored a goal, though. 1 goal and 18 goals against. It's a rough go for those boys from Glasgow. All right, so let's move on to Group C. I've decided at this point in the exercise that I'd rather just go from group to group instead of trying to figure out which games came first chronologically. So I hope that's okay. Switch it up mid-video. But I also just really want to talk about this Barcelona-Bayern game while I still have the energy. Barcelona coming to the Champions League, having to make the knockout stage, having to make a deep run because they have bet against themselves, or bet on themselves, essentially, wagering and leveraging future revenues in order to afford players for the now. And it kind of seems like if they missed, or at least over the offseason, it seemed like if they missed out on big Champions League revenue, then they could go bankrupt. And here they are. It's not looking good. If they won today, they wouldn't have even been guaranteed a shot through, but it would have been a little bit more likely. They did not win today. And in fact, Bayern looked just next level against this Barca team. And to see them come out in a game that should be this significant to them and to just completely lay an egg is just unexcusable. I'm not the biggest Barca fan. I like watching them. I love Messi, so I have that kind of feeling of nostalgia in my heart of watching those Messi Barcelona teams, but seeing everything they've done after Messi, seeing just how incompetent they are as an organization, it's wild. So let's talk about this game. It ends up being 3-0 Bayern Munich over Barcelona, but the real sticking point of this game is just how incredible Bayern Munich looked. Serge Gnabry, just the ball on a string. And this in the first goal that is scored. Gnabry sends in this over-the-top ball that just pierces through Barcelona's back line. And it's a goal that Sadio Mane starts its run. He's a little bit behind the defender, but it's just weighted so perfectly that by the time Mane is able to beat his defender, he's on the ball and it's just on his right foot. He takes a couple of dribbles and just lasers it past Ter Stegen. And like, just like rewatching that goal in my head, Serge Gnabry is just so good. Sadio Mane had a fantastic game playing on the wing as well. This was just an all-around fantastic game for Bayern. Of course, your usual good games from Pavard, good games from Alphonso Davies, good game from Joshua Kimmich, and De Ligt actually had a pretty good game as well. I don't know, there's not much else to say outside just complete domination from Barcelona. And even when you look at like the advanced stats, because sometimes in blowouts like this, the expected goals don't necessarily match up because it's just a striker having a day or a goalkeeper having a rough one. But even in the expected goals margin, Bayern Munich completely overran Barcelona. 2 expected goals to half an expected goal, 14 shots to 9 Barcelona shots, and Barcelona actually had more of the possession, which is probably not in their favor at this point. With this Bayern team, I think you want them to have possession and hope to hit them on the counter, if that's a way to beat them. But when you look at the chances, Bayern had 5 big chances to Barcelona's 0. They had 0 attempts that really registered in a high XG chance. And that's what this game bears out, is Bayern do such a good job of just limiting Barcelona's aggressive attack. And even though they had more of the possession, 52-48, that possession for the most part was kind of pointless. And sometimes when you're a team that just has trouble really breaking down the defense, your possession just ends up being passing it back and forth to your goalkeeper, to your defenders, and trying to find that way forward, but just never finding a way to break through. And that's kind of what you get in this match. So Bayern just completely bossing the table at this point. Like I said, first goal in the 10th minute from Sadio Mane, second goal in the 30th minute from Choupo-Moting, and then third goal coming towards the end of the game in the 95th minute from Benjamin Pavard. There's also a Serge Gnabry, another goal ruled out because of offsides. If he had a goal and 3 assists, that would have been wild. But alas, we were not given that today. But elsewhere in the group, you had more just complete domination of a performance, and one that was more needed. Inter coming to this game probably needing a win, especially if Barca were to win. But since Barca lost, some of that pressure is taken off, and the fact that they were playing Victoria Plzen is maybe a little bit more of an indicator of how this game would go. Inter end up putting in another great performance with goals from Mkhitaryan in the 35th minute, an Edin Dzeko goal in the 42nd minute. Edin Dzeko goals, we love to see that. And the second Edin Dzeko goal in the second half, Edin Dzeko scoring 2 goals. He just warms my heart, fills my heart seeing that happen. Make it 3-0 in the 66th minute, and then Romelu Lukaku with that 4th goal to really seal it at the end of the game. Dzeko ended up being the man of the match in this one, which I think is right, because not even just his goals, but his off-the-ball movement. He just continues to be such an underrated player, and especially for how long he's been at Inter. Underrated attacker for just how potent he still can be. And that's where that group ends up staying. So Group C, you had Bayern Munich at 15 points, undefeated record, 16 goals for, 2 goals against. You have Inter, they're in second place, 10 points now guaranteed to go through. Barcelona with 4 points in third, going to the Europa League. And then Victoria Plzen bringing up the rear with 3 goals for, 20 against, and 0 points altogether. So we're reaching the halfway point as we move into Group D. Group D is a fun group. It's definitely the closest group so far that we've covered, and one with the most kind of volatility as well. When you look at the favorites, the favorite being Tottenham, and you think of, just how easy it is for them to stumble along the way. And they did a little bit of stumbling today. Not as bad as it could have been, but they did a little bit of stumbling. So let's talk about that game first as Tottenham take on Sporting Lisbon. Marcus Edwards scores for Lisbon in the 22nd minute to make it 1-0 Lisbon. And then Tottenham looked to be outplayed for a lot of this game. That's not how it ended up being, but when you figure that Tottenham then don't score until the 80th minute. And I thought, Tottenham scored in the 80th minute. There's no chance that they either score a go-ahead goal. I think the chances are probably much more likely that they just turn around and let one up after all the Tottenham I've been watching this year. And that's not really how it went, because Harry Kane scores a goal in the 95th minute, but it is ruled offside after VAR takes a look at it. And ultimately, it was the right call. Like, the way the VAR looked at it, what they saw, Harry Kane was offside, as much as I generally just hate how long VAR takes and kind of the spirit of the game it takes away when you have calls like this that, they're crucial, you want to get it right, but sometimes it feels like we're looking at freaking centimeters in grass, and it doesn't really seem like that much of an advantage was given. But I thought this call was correct. So it stays 1-1. Antonio Conte gets a red card at the end of the game. That's not his first. It won't be his last. And Tottenham tie Lisbon 1-1, despite outplaying Lisbon, especially over the second half. Tottenham, I think, especially after Lisbon got that goal, they go into the second half up 1-0. They played a lot more just sheltered ball, a lot more safe ball, because you're winning. You had the lead, and you've had the lead since the early going. And Tottenham, for all the grief that we give them, are the more talented team here. And it really bears out when you look at the goal score, and Tottenham at 1.7 expected goals, a Sporting 0.89, and that's probably fair. This game probably should have been 2-1 going off the game score, but that's not how soccer is played, my friends. It's not how football is played. So, kind of an unexpected result. Tottenham playing at home, tying to Sporting, but them's the breaks, my friends. So let's move on to the second game of this group as Eintracht Frankfurt take on Marseille. In this game, everything that you really need to know about happens in the first 30 minutes. Kamada scores in the 3rd minute. Guendouzi equalizes in the 22nd. Then Muani scores in the 27th. And that's it. That's all the goals we have. And of course, it was an interesting game. It was a lot of yellow cards in this one. It was very chippy, back and forth. Guendouzi, I thought, played a fantastic game. Mbemba for Marseille. Man, I actually kind of like Marseille a lot. And Frankfurt, Goetze, that's a guy that Mario Goetze that you want to see succeed at this stage of his career as well. And he looks like someone that might make the Germany team again. He played so well here, getting an assist on one of the Muani goals, and just being someone who was crucial with how they were able to set up. And when you have Kamada and so being such a strong double pivot, and then Goetze, being someone who is that left attacking mid and just crucial in how they're able to advance the ball in this game. You look at kind of where the XG lies, and pretty low event. It's a 1 expected goal for Eintracht Frankfurt to 0.61 for Marseille. And really what that means, so I talked about Marseille, expected goals, and it's especially relevant in Marseille's in this game, but expected goals really just mean it's a way to tell you what the run of play looked like. It's not a predictor necessarily of who wins the game. It doesn't necessarily even tell you who should have won the game, but it just tells you who kind of dominated the run of play. It's very dependent on quality of striker, on quality of defender, on quality of goalkeeper, that you could have a pretty high XG, but if you don't have a striker to convert on those high XG chances, then that XG for the most part is useless. So it's a good indicator to see what the run of play looked like, who got the most out of what exchanges, and generally a team that underscores its XG continually, it works better as a multi-game stat because you can identify problems in the setup, you can identify problems in the roster selection, but for a game-by-game basis, it definitely tells you, who had most of the run of play, and this one was relatively close. Like I said, 0.98 to 0.61. Frankfurt definitely got the most of it in that 2-1 result. It seems fair to me. So Frankfurt ended up winning over Marseille, and then you look at Group D as we sit right now going into Matchday 6. Tottenham Hotspur lead the way with 8 points. Sporting Lisbon was 7 in second. Eintracht Frankfurt also was 7. Goal differential is the difference there. And then Marseille in 4th, but they have 6 points. So a win over Tottenham in the last match day and a Sporting and Frankfurt tie. Marseille could still win the group. So Group D is so fun and so close. Goal differential wise is crazy too. Tottenham have a 1 goal differential. Lisbon have a 0 goal differential. Frankfurt are -2 and Marseille at 1. So even that could be made up in one game. So there's really no telling of what that last match day could be. That's the most exciting group to me. So moving on to Group E, you have Chelsea, Milan, Salzburg, and Dynamo Zagreb. So let's roll into those games a little bit more. So first game I want to talk about, Salzburg and Chelsea. This was maybe one of the more exciting games that I've watched of Chelsea lately. I think I talked about this on our TikTok, but I think Graham Potter's tactical selections, kind of like cleaning up the mess of Thomas Tuchel, is very intriguing to me as tries to figure out what he has in this mess of a logjam in midfield, and selfishly in how Christian Pulisic plays as a American fan as well. And this was another example of him playing well in this setup. He has an assist in this game. The assist, he takes on 3 Salzburg defenders to make space for Kai Havertz. He kind of slots it over, and this Havertz goal is just a golazo. He's kind of one-touches it from the edge of the box and hits it bar down. So it definitely wasn't a tap and assist, but the way that he was able to create space for Kai Havertz just shows you just like how much attention he can grab from opposing defenders, how he can really just drag defenders out of space, open up space for those attackers, and then slot it over. I think that's where Pulisic operates best. He operates best that way when he's not trying to dribble directly at defenders, but more or less when he's trying to create space for an attacker running on, or he's also great in transition when he can kind of get in behind. So that's kind of Pulisic's skill set, and when he's dribbling directly at 3 defenders with no one else open, he's not good in that scenario. And there are players who are very good in that scenario, but that's not Pulisic's strength. So that tirade aside, Chelsea end up winning this one 2-1 over Salzburg in a game that I thought Chelsea played pretty well. They definitely hung on to where Chelsea, don't get a ride is in their subs, and Salzburg, as this game goes on, are able to pick up some of that game score back. And I think when you look at, the quality of subs and how the subs in Chelsea's case really performed, Broha, Loftus-Cheek, and Azpilicueta all had bad games from the 15 minutes that they had. You see Ziyech, you see Mason Mount come in towards the end of the game. Those are kind of non-consequential. But when you look at the starting roster, starting 11, pretty much to a T, all had fantastic games. And then when they get tired and you have to rely on that bench, that's where Graham Potter needs to figure out these player roles and where everybody fits in. He hasn't done that yet. But Chelsea escaped with a win here, even if it wasn't entirely comfortable. You had a Kovacic goal in the 23rd minute to make it 1-0. You had a Adamou goal from Salzburg to make it 1-1. And then, of course, that Kai Havertz goal in the 64th minute that I mentioned earlier to make it 2-1 Chelsea. They're able to see it out despite a interesting goalkeeper decision from Kepa towards the end of this game. In stoppage time, he gets a yellow card, and that's how it goes. It ends up being 2-1 Chelsea, and Salzburg, did make it kind of interesting towards the end of this game. So then we move on to Group G. Group G is Man City, Borussia Dortmund, Sevilla, and Copenhagen. So very interesting group, especially when you consider that City and Dortmund are going at each other again. Both teams most likely through, but of course Sevilla could make things interesting if they upset Man City and Dortmund can't get past Copenhagen. But let's talk about these games before we go into the implications of Matchday 6. So Dortmund against Man City, this kind of felt like a game that was gonna be this way. You have Haaland's first game back in Dortmund. Two teams that fought somewhat hard, even if City kind of beat up on Dortmund a bit in the game in Manchester. Here on the road, you have a pretty decently rotated squad for Manchester City as well, so kind of what you would expect out of this game. A 0-0 affair that saw Gregor Kobel save a penalty from Riyad Mahrez, which really was Manchester City just apologizing for the buyout clause in Erling Haaland's contract, I'm pretty sure. Haaland also had probably the worst game of the season, which again was probably him feeling bad in Dortmund. I don't know. Is this bit working? Do you guys like this bit? Should I keep going? Are we good? Anyway, so it ends up 0-0. Dortmund get the tie, they get the draw, they get the points, and should be through to the knockouts with that. Overall, if we're kind of breaking down this game on a game-by-game basis, City had pretty much all of the possession, but that's kind of what you'd expect out of these two teams. Again, Dortmund like to control the game out of possession, and City are the exact opposite. So Manchester City end up having 73% of the possession to Dortmund's 27%, but everything else is pretty much even down the line. XG was 1.19 to 1.16, so it's a pretty back and forth game. Ultimately, the difference is, of course, the goalkeepers, with Kobel making that save and Ortega actually having a pretty good game as well. Zach Steven, a little upset probably that he's been sent to Middlesbrough after this, but what you gonna do, Zach? All right, moving on to the next game in this group, Sevilla against FC Copenhagen. Sevilla end up winning 3-0 behind goals from Ed Nasiri, Isco, and Montiel. Just a solid outing from Sevilla. Spanish teams outside of Barcelona doing okay. Sevilla over Copenhagen. And a game that, you would expect them to win. You would expect them to look like this in a game that was a must win for Sevilla. They still have an outside chance of making it. Of course, they play Man City in Game 6, which that's not good. And the group standings, Manchester City at 11 points, Dortmund at 8 points, Sevilla at 5, and then Copenhagen at 2. So they would need to win. They would need Dortmund to lose to Copenhagen, and then they would need to make up 9 goals in the goal differential. So for all intents and purposes, Dortmund are through to the group stages, but it could still go sideways, I guess, in the worst case scenario. I just don't see it happening. Into Group H, where you have PSG, Benfica, Juventus, and Maccabi Haifa. Let's talk about PSG and Haifa first, and then we'll go into the Juve talk, because that's a good place to end this video, I think. So PSG just totally destroyed Maccabi Haifa, 7-2. You had 2 goals from Messi, 2 goals from Mbappe, goal from Neymar, an own goal, and a goal from Soler. And this is just one of those games that you remember just how talented PSG are. For all their inabilities to see things out in the Champions League, this is one of those games oh yeah, well, Messi is still one of the best players in the world, and Neymar is also arguably the best player in the world, and Mbappe is also arguably the best player in the world. And when you have those three just playing on this elevated level, it just reminds you of why this team doesn't win the Champions League is beyond me. Mbappe with 2 goals and 2 assists, Messi with 2 goals and 2 assists, Neymar with a goal. That's just an incredible performance, and when you watch it, they just had their way with Maccabi Haifa. Ultimately, you feel a little bit bad for that defense having to deal with this, but Champions League is Champions League, and when you're matched up with PSG and Benfica and Juve, that's a rough group. So moving on to the next game, we don't need to talk that much about this PSG game. It was a dominant performance. That's all you need to know. The next game, of course, being the Benfica-Juve matchup. That saw Benfica win 4-3 over Juve. Juventus now 8th in Serie A, 3rd place right now in this Champions League group with 3 points. With this loss, they are guaranteed to not make it to the knockout stage, and depending on how that game against PSG goes, maybe not in Europe, but they have a pretty hefty goal differential. So I think they'll be okay unless Haifa can beat Benfica. But let's talk about this game. So you had a goal in the 17th minute from Silva. You then had Keane in the 21st minute tying it up. You had Mario hitting a pen in the 28th minute. Then you had Rafa Silva going up 3-1. Moise Keane got a goal in the 21st minute. So 3-1 going into halftime. Rafa Silva puts Benfica up 4-1. And then Juve find a little bit of life here. And this is the part of the game that I would like to talk about most, because it really speaks to what Juve have been going through with Allegri. They just seem to get up for games after they've already put in a bad performance. And you see that in Serie A, and you saw that here again today, where the final scoreline is 4-3, but Juve outplayed Benfica in the second half. They really charged in late, but ultimately, when you give a team 3 goals in the first half, when you ship 3 goals in the first half, you're not going to be able to make up that ground. So, goals from Malik and goals from Weston McKennie make it 4-3 in the 79th minute, and then you have 15 minutes after that where they're just playing for that tying goal, and eventually they just can't go. Benfica were great. Relentless in the first half, just making Juventus throw themselves into bad mistakes. And I think that's really the difference here. And even though you could still argue that Juventus had the more talented roster, Benfica deserved this win. And even when you look at the XG stats, Benfica had 3.36 expected goals to Juve's 2.44. Not a defensive game, that's for sure, when you look at the expected goals like that. In fact, you rarely see over 3 expected goals. But just shows that Benfica deserved this win. They thoroughly outplayed Juve, and Juve left it too late before they really found that tactic that worked for them. So when you look at the final group standings, like I talked about, PSG leading the group with 11 points, plus 4 goal differential on Benfica. So they have 8 goal differential. Benfica has 4 goal differential and 11 points. So they're tied at the top, but they are both guaranteed through to the knockout round. Juventus with 3 points at a negative 3 goal differential, and Maccabi Haifa at 3 points with a negative 9 goal differential. And folks, that is where we stand at the end of match day 5. So let me know which result was maybe the most surprising for you. Which group has been the most surprising for you so far down in the comments. I would love to know who you're watching and what you're watching for. Ultimately, my biggest disappointments are Juve and Barcelona, especially with Barcelona's, they put so much pressure on Champions League results before the season started. To see them just completely drop out into the Europa League, and then who knows from there, is so disappointing when you realize that they really mortgaged their future on Champions League results. And then Juve are Juve. They've been in the mud for a little while now. Not that I'm a big Juve fan. I just hate seeing that for Weston McKennie. So all right, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, if you liked what I had to give me a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. And again, tomorrow you will see the Women's Champions League breakdown. I have a lot to talk about there. Sam Kerr just going on FIFA mode today. So make sure you subscribe to see that video. And folks, thanks for watching. We'll talk soon.